Uh, I forgot what we were even saying. Oh yes. So tell us about your
John's
interaction. With
Yeah,
him.
I'll give you the breakdown as clear and concise as I possibly can, because there were so many just different threads, and then it got
It's messy.
from Twitter to I decided to put it on Instagram, and then we had DMs. But basically, it started with Lacrae's tweet, like we were mentioning earlier. I'm not progressive. I'm not liberal. I'm not conservative. I'm kingdom.
Yeah.
And then Sean Foyt, worship leader, decided to put an old Instagram photo of Lacrae and Stacey Abrams,
Right.
and just had a caption that said, "Really?" Question mark.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, that's how it popped up on my Twitter feed. I was like, okay, this is interesting. Again, like we talked about, you're not trying to get put in a box, but I'm looking
Here's
to
what I
you
see.
by your free. This
Yeah.
is what I see. So I decided to respond after he responded to Sean. He said, "Hey, I'll be the first to admit I didn't know her stances. I did know that my daughter needed to see representation of herself in society. Now would I trade unbiblical views for representation? No. If you didn't grow up without healthy representation, you probably wouldn't understand." So that gets into like a multifaceted thing of, yes, representation over godliness. And
That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the lens through which he sees
Right.
reality.
And obviously, we just saw what happened with the election here with Kamala Harris, and it's like, oh, it's so great to see a woman up there and a woman of color, and blah blah blah. It's like, as Christians, like, are they living up to biblical standards?
Right.
Here, you're supposed to be living your life off biblical standards, and he put in the caption, and that's what I ended up calling him out for. Was like, hey, I'm a little confused. I was poking a little bit, but not in like trying to annoy him. Like, hey, I'm actually genuinely
Yeah.
interested
Yeah.
in getting some clarity to this here. So I just said, I'm confused. You mentioned her stances in the caption of the Instagram photo, so you can't play
The ignorance card.
ignorance card
Yeah.
at all. And then he responds to me, it's just like, that was the point, not because she knows your stances. And then I shared it, and he ended up saying, "Dear Stacey Abrams, my daughter looks up to you, and she's 9, not because she's familiar with your stances." So, and that's where it got into another thing of like, okay, like, oh, you need to read the whole post. And I'm like, I'm happy to read the whole post, but you took it down for some reason. So like, let's get a little bit
put it
more.
back up,
Yeah,
yeah.
let's get some clarity. Let's make sure that like I'm not looking at it in a certain way, because I got my own biases, no doubt. We all do. So just
yeah.
put it out there and explain it, not for me, but for everybody
Right.
that looks to you, because that's the big thing. It's like, I am nobody in this conversation. You don't speak to me. We speak to God on these issues, and we're supposed to be representing him. And then it was one of those like, hey, you had a deleted tweet, and then you had a deleted IG post. Like, I'm just interested. And I was like, would you denounce her stances now? So I'm going to ask that question. And then radio silence.
Yeah.
And then I asked him something else too when he had a so I was like, all right, I'm going to keep this train rolling. And I ended up saying Lacrae, a lyric he had, "Lord, kill me if I don't preach the gospel." Also Lacrae. He promoted this guy that went to he got his master's in theology at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
It's Kyle Howard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he ended up saying in May of 2021, I graduate with my master's in theology today. I won't be there to walk down the aisle to get my diploma, because even in the sight of my seminary's campus is trauma triggering to me and my wife. Seminary was a dehumanizing and traumatic experience for me and my family. And then Lacrae ended up saying, "Congrats, and consider yourself Moses for being schooled by the Egyptians so you can help with the Exodus." So it's all these things where it's like, hey, I'm seeing all these things that just don't line up biblically. Theologically, they're off. It seems like there's a racial representation over godliness. And he said to me that he still stood by that tweet.
Okay.
And at that point, it's like, okay, explain. Like, I'd like to hear, so it's not just, hey, we have 140 characters.
Right.
Like, let's actually go to this. So he didn't answer to that one. And then I decided I'm taking it to Instagram. And then he basically just tried to tell me, like, you wouldn't have it, like we hear from tons of people. There's no way that you're thinking we could have a fruitful, good conversation. All you want to do is just call me out. It's like, no, like, I think this is probably the best way to love you.
Yeah.
Do I go about things perfect? No. Do I have a little bit of pride about this stuff and let that rule me? Sure. Do I have a major zeal for the gospel and Jesus Christ? Of course. but like, let's have a conversation. Then it turned into him responding in the comments, and then we took it to DMs, and it was very condescending in the DMs. And very much like a, hey, you don't even know the origin of woke. Read this book and educate yourself, and then maybe we'll have a yeah. Oof. And that's where I was just like, hey, I understand where woke came from. And I understand how so many things have been redefined and weaponized. But like, when people think of woke here, that's what matters. Obviously, we know where marriage came from, but that's been redefined in a lot of ways. So that's when it's like, we know what love is. That's been redefined. So like, we got to talk about the definitions of terms here. And all I'm trying to do is, hey, let's have a conversation. What do you think about abortion? Why do you support Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock? Why do you believe that you're going to prescribe to this one way of thinking and think the other way is so bad? And then it turned into, I don't really think you're educated on this. You're not really worth my time. That's it. It was a huge bummer, but I think it turned into like, all right, wow, this actually led to a little bit more of a conversation. I don't know if I'll ever have a conversation with him. If people are betting people out there, I don't know how Christian that would be. I'm not going to promote it. Sponsored by FanDuel.
But that can be one of two things too. It can be, you mentioned Vody. I mean, he coined the term ethnic Gnosticism. Yeah. Which is essentially, you haven't walked a mile in my shoes, so you don't know. Yeah. I have this special knowledge because of my
intersectionality.
Right. I have this special knowledge because of my experience, and that trumps everything. Yeah. Trumps truth. And again, that lens through which you see everything. But it's also kind of the attitude of a lot of intellectual evangelical elites too. You're not on my level. Yeah. You know, you need these credentials first. You need to, you know, have these letters in your name. I'm not saying that's what he said, but I'm trying to provide some possibilities as to, okay, this is a good faith discussion between brothers. There's genuine concern over this. And so this is how you respond to that. You know, you don't want to know, you don't care, or in a sense, you're not on my level. I mean, in a very, you know, off-putting way. Yeah. So, I mean, what is it, you know? And
that's where I'd go back to, like, there's no doubt for Lacrae, there's hurt.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
From his base, and hurt from even some of the stuff he covered in Church Close 4. Like, he continues to open up about his past and his childhood and everything. And obviously, we care deeply and empathize with the hurt that people go through. So I hope nobody would ever think with any of us that we're going into something like, hopefully I win this debate with Lacrae. It's like, no, let's get down to like what the truth is. Talk about your experience, but stop using experience like LeBron James does as painting a broad brush that this is happening to everybody in this racial demographic. Or like it's being on both sides where it's like, if you're white, sit down, shut up. But also silence is violence. So like, what do you want us to do? And then it's just like, hey, this side, we got to elevate these people. You sit down for a little bit, be quiet, and then we'll get to this point of equity and equality. It's like, is that biblical at all? Like, what foundation are you basing this off of? And it's becoming more and more dangerous, more and more divided. And then it comes into just like, oh, I'm following Christ, but kind of in this little specific way. And it almost becomes like a denomination inside of a denomination or something. It's like, it's odd.
Well, look, we're all white cisgender males here, right? So we're not allowed. We have zero intersections. We have zero hope for having any intersections. And so what you experience is what you just said. You're a white cisgender male. Shut up. You don't understand. You're never going to understand. Read this sort of a thing. And that's kind of, you know, that's where they're at with things. And it's crazy. I mean, what stinks is when he says he's kingdom minded, the concern, and I don't want to just outright accuse him of this, but the concern is, hey, brother, it kind of seems like the kingdom you're promoting has a color preference.
Yeah.
Right. And so the issue is like, I'm not even going to say racism, it's tribalism.